Welcome back to the PropTech AI podcast, folks. I'm your host, Stuart Quintel, and today I'm joined by Tom from Bloqq. Now, Bloqq is doing something quite interesting in the UK property market. So the way Tom describes it is they're sort of like a pop-up hotel for existing operators, but they help quite a few different verticals within the short-term and the letting area of the market. So purpose-built short-term student accommodation, build-to-rent, and also co-living operators. So, look, Tom, great to have on the podcast, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Really, really good.
Now, look, I obviously just very briefly covered off the verticals that you sort of look after, but sort of, give us a rundown. What is Bloqq, and how did you get involved, or how did it come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at our core we're a short-term rental property management company, so doing short stays, Airbnb, Booking.com, for guests staying anywhere from two plus nights. Average length of stay is typically 10 plus days, but we work, I always like to say we're a niche within a niche. So we are a short-term rental property manager, but we focus, as you quite rightly pointed out at the start, on three very distinct verticals. And rather than trying to remove stock from the market and hold them long-term to do short-term rentals within, we complement our clients' business models where they're these humongous high-rise buildings and portfolios spanning multiple cities and territories. We act as an extension to their business. So we solve those periodic voids that they'll see throughout the building's life cycle and even throughout as much as the year. So we sort of, we always, as I say, we like to act as that extension, and we complement each other very well. So what it means for our clients is that they're not having to drop prices to sort of fill those rooms. We can come in, operate for a few months, and then once they've found either demand again or they're back into high season, they can re-rent those rooms. So it keeps us busy, and it's a very interesting business model that we absolutely adore.
So how did you personally sort of get involved or get into this space, especially into the PropTech and real estate space?
Yeah, it's funny. If you ask anyone in our industry from the short-term rental space, I think no one sort of intentionally goes into it. Everyone seems to fall into it somehow. Myself, I definitely fell into it. I come from an mechanical engineering background, working in sort of energy systems back at the start of my career. Didn't really see a long-term future in that for me. I've always sort of known I wanted to be in the startup world. I've always been fascinated by entrepreneurialism. I had the pleasure of growing up with a lot of friends and mums and dads of friends who were very successful entrepreneurs. So I was always I got that bug quite at an early age. And it was really sort of at a point in my career where I wasn't really happy with what I was doing. And I had a wonderful stay at a beautiful villa in Greece, and I was just like, this is an interesting case. This was sort of back in the day when Airbnb and Booking.com was really starting to take off for the more conventional properties, and I sort of fell into it, and I went and worked with one of the bigger property management companies at the time, and bit the bug, and I've sort of been in the industry ever since, really. So it's been a fantastic journey of learning for me.
Yep. Now with I guess a couple of the niches that you look after, so the purpose-built student accommodation and also the build-to-rent. When we first spoke, you sort of mentioned that they're not strong asset classes, but because they're not always built for flexibility. How did that how did you overcome that, and also what do you mean by that they're not built for flexibility?
I think, they are very strong asset classes. But they just don't do well in very changing market conditions, and also hyper-competitive markets. We see it in some cities where there's an oversupply, certainly in the purpose-built student accommodation world. And rather than cannibalizing on price, that's where the smart operators are looking outward to see what other strategies they can, another arrow in their quiver, so to speak, of like how they can monetize their building without absolutely just dropping the rates and hoping to fill the building. So I've been aware of the niche for many years, and I've always found it very fascinating. And I think as the world gets more and more diverse and flexible and nomadic in a way, there's this need and desire for people to travel more, to be more flexible, and also cost of living being what it is today, not everyone can afford the luxury of going going to live in the town that they're going to university in. A lot of students stay with mum and dad, or they stay in nearby towns and commute in. So there is a real hunger for flexibility and affordability for students and for the wider rental tenant, because it's so easy to travel today, but it's also cost of living of being what it is. They need that flexibility. So the short-term rentals within this asset class or asset classes really serves that purpose of being able to accommodate guests for a shorter length of stay, whilst also giving this guest access to an incredibly well put together building with all sorts of amenities, often very well located. It is literally a hotel in many regards, with sort of the buildings that we run, they're so high spec.
With, I guess sort of, the interesting thing is you're not trying to replace, I guess, that long-term rental model, but you're sitting more, you're more of a flexible layer that sits around it. So how do you explain that to the asset owners who might be nervous about short stays?
I think that it all comes down to what they're most nervous about is the voids and the revenue gaps. So when we come in with a solution that's saying, look, we're not asking for you to rent us these units for 12 months, 16, 18 months, 2 years. We can come in from as little as 2 to 3 months over the summer, for example. We're gearing up for the summer at the moment. So that nervousness of the asset owner does disappear when they see that there's a solution to the revenue problem that they have and they see. Then it becomes a case of just educating around the nature of short-term rentals, because that in itself, unfortunately does have a little bit of a bad rap. And that's one of the things I am working very hard on, to kind of change those perceptions and educate the wider industry around, yes, we've all seen those news stories, and, it's not to say they don't exist, but, when properties are run well with strong, management companies that have a really strong oversight into the guests and what's going on in those buildings, those can be mitigated. So the nervousness is sort of twofold. The revenue starts the conversation, and then obviously explaining the intricacies of the operations then sort of solves that. But then that's another thing we do, is we'll run pilots with certain operators. If they are nervous but they really want to get a taste for it, we can run a limited time pilot for them to see what it looks like, for them to expand further, which has worked quite well for us in the past.
Yep. I guess that sort of brings me on to something else. Like, a big part of your model is that Bloqq does not sort of just provide the platform. You also bring in the operations side as well, including people on site where needed. Tell us a bit more about that model and how important has that been to your growth?
Yeah, I think it's been fundamental in many regards, because when you look at short-term rentals in these asset classes, it's I always walk into meetings never assuming people know what we do. There's clients that have a vast amount of experience with short-term rentals, some that have no experience. So really, we kind of start off by really just sort of, Stuart, can you answer that question again? Because I don't think I caught the hook on that one. Sorry about that, mate.
No problem, mate. Just
going off on a bloody tangent.
All right. So I guess it's quite important what you mentioned there about the operations side as well, because a big part of the model that you mentioned that Bloqq has is not just platform. You've also got the operational side. You bring the people on site where it's needed. So how important is that to the model, and also how has that been working for your growth strategies?
Yeah, it's been fundamental to our growth. There's a varied amount of deployment of short-term rentals in these asset classes. It can be from as little as 5 units to 50 to 500. What we're seeing is short-term rentals within these asset classes is still, it's not a new thing, but it's something that's maturing. And to do it really well, I think the bigger operators long-term will build essentially an internal Bloqq within to their business model, because it's such a different business to the nature of long-term stays. So when we come in as an operator, as a sort of portfolio partner, and we can go as far as putting people on site, running all the cleanings, the linens, the towels, the check-ins, as well as all the software and back-end stuff of advertising and sort of doing dynamic pricing and driving occupancy consistently. what that allows us as an operator to do is become quite sticky as a service provider, as a portfolio partner, because they're not having to do all that heavy investment in staff, technology, and also gaining that experience of how to do it. And they get a taste of short-term rentals, with a provider that's built to serve this specific niche. So fundamentally, we've basically been able to provide on a silver plate to our clients and potential clients what they know they want to be able to do and invest in potentially long term as they get bigger. But as they're still learning that business model, they get to sort of get some experience on it without having to go for that big investment.
Would that model break down if you left too much of the guest experience to the existing landlord or the existing operators?
If it's staffed well and there's a good enough experience, I believe they can do it, absolutely, and anyone can. But I think it's unwise to think, if you hire an additional person to the reception, that you have enough capacity to then run short-term rentals, because it's so much more than, there's a guest arriving today, I need to check them in. It's the whole coordination of, what you're saying about the property online, how you're marketing it, what pricing you're using to compare it to other buildings in the area. And that's why, we're a growing team and we have all these pockets of experience. So there is always the risk, and I think some of the bigger operators in our space, some of them are already doing it, building teams to solve this. But we're not necessarily always going to be going after the biggest players in the industry. We love that mid-market where they have 3 to 15 buildings. They're huge deployment, but for them it's still something that they're unsure about, and they want that flexibility to focus on their core operating model, which is long-term rentals, but then have the flexibility to bring us in when they need us, which oftentimes can be very last minute. They can give us as little as 3 to 6 weeks notice. But what a lot of clients are starting to do with us now, as we embed further and further into their business model, is they're building us into their go-to-market plan. When they're looking at bringing new buildings on, we're part of that process of, putting numbers together for those foreseen voids throughout the calendar year or the building's life cycle.
Speaking of, the voids, metrics, what sort of your key metrics that you track? Because obviously, an empty building is not making money, but
totally,
it's probably only a fraction of part of the metrics that you're working with. Like, what is your core metrics that you work with? So
I think the one that we've focused on most in the last 18 months, and you sort of mentioned it earlier in sort of the chat around this nervousness around the short-term rental concept. So we've very much worked to a metric of time to value, and we see that as being the first guest checking in, the first guest arriving to the property, and we count the days between that onboarding call to that first guest arrival, and we monitor that very clearly, because the longer that happens, the longer the space of time that occurs, doubt can start to creep in. Is this the right thing for us? Have we just invested in the wrong strategy here? Do I look silly in front of my asset manager that we've chosen to do the strategy? So by us having a very consistent approach to getting our team aligned and prepared for these onboarding calls, these kickoff calls, and then working very, very hard with the client and site teams after that call to then basically make that building ready. So our current sort of time to value or time to first guest is 13 days. That's our sort of Q1 metric, which is quite impressive. We can definitely do a little bit more on that, but it also very much depends on we can only do so much. Our clients also need to work with us on these sort of deadlines as well. But thankfully, a lot of them are obviously very motivated to do so. And I think the sort of wider reason why time to value is so important beyond just our business is if you have a sales cycle, whether it takes 3 months or in our case 12 to 18 months to sort of close a deal, you've built up such a relationship and rapport and excitement with that prospect. The worst thing you can do as a business owner in any business is then sort of let that excitement dwindle. It's sort of like the onboarding dip of doom, so to speak. That what happens next. It's all about making sure you deliver an experience that really keeps them excited and motivated, and with that belief that it truly is going to be a success. So we're all aligned on that as a business. We sort of work on things to improve that, and it's going to continue to be a North Star for us as we scale over the coming months and years for sure.
Yeah. What's been surprising about the market and the metrics over the last 18 months then that you've noticed?
So we've also diversified over the last 18 months. We've brought in an additional 2 service offerings. So we started out as a business as full management, as sort of what we described at the top of the call, where we deliver a team to site and we do the entirety of this pop-up hotel management. But what we're seeing in some of these smaller buildings where they want to run maybe a pilot with 5 to 10 units, they really have some skepticism about us being able to deliver verified and vetted students into their student accommodation on a short-term basis. There's also there's this desire to sort of have a lesser impacting pilot period, so we can launch with a smaller number of units in order for us to facilitate that and also to improve the margins for our clients. We've also, as I said, brought in 2 additional service offerings. The lightest touch one is our digital management service, where we sit as that digital layer on top of, we do all the channels, the pricing, the guest messaging, the communication. We essentially get the guest to the door, and then that site team then takes over from the operator. They meet the guest and then they'll check them in. They'll also do the cleans and turnarounds. So that's the lightest touch. Those are some of the fastest sites to get up, and that's where we've seen the model diversify the most. So our numbers have had to move to sort of accommodate for these. And then that middle business model is the hybrid model, where we don't necessarily staff the site full time, 24/7, but what we can do is we can come in and deliver the cleans and the turnarounds and the linens, which is often the most complicated part for a multitude of reasons. And what it will do is, we've seen sites that will start with us on 5-10 units, and they see the success, they see the occupancy that we're able to drive, and they're like, we can't keep up with the amount of cleans and bookings you're delivering as Bloqq. Is there another way? And that's when the hybrid comes in, when we can bring our local cleaners in, and then we have more ability to turn rooms around faster, get more booked nights, and obviously generate further revenue. So it's sort of that middle ground that's been quite successful for us, which is nice.
Yeah. You started mentioning some of the systems, I guess, like getting into the technology and system sides, because you've just mentioned things there, like you've got the platform and also operations, plus also then the servicing side. So what are the core systems that help you run Bloqq efficiently?
So we have a core PMS, property management system, that sort of spans the length and breadth of our business. So we list all of our buildings and units on there. We do all of our guest messaging through there. It sort of acts as the central nervous system of our business. Everything kind of runs through that, and then we tack on additional softwares to solve various problems around the student vetting and the guest experience. We also do a lot of work with messaging of guests. We're starting to deploy more and more AI in sort of helping us take off sort of that 50% layer of messaging that doesn't need to be met by a human agent. So think of what's the Wi-Fi, where's the nearest bus stop, these sorts of things that we already collect and gather in our building notes that are already available. That's seen us really be able to scale up fast, because then our team of human agents, they're able then to sort of add that really high level, high touch, high impact communication that guests want to expect. So that's been helpful, and also we work with quite a few systems and softwares around occupancy planning and pricing, dynamic pricing. It's so important in certain markets where there's an oversupply to be hyper vigilant around how we price these buildings, and we have to sort of adopt a hotel revenue management strategy, because we're not just bringing one apartment to market. We can be bringing as much as 500 to 700 units to market at any one time. So it's about balancing how do we fill enough beds consistently whilst also not dropping the price too low that then the numbers don't then make sense for the property. So there's a lot that goes on. We have an ethos of buying, but also we're more and more starting to build some of our own stuff and tech, which is a really interesting thing, because we are a niche within a niche. very much so. So when we go to these conferences and shows and talk about our business model to the sort of suppliers that we work with, they're always like, oh, that's a very interesting niche, but you have a lot of differences to our typical customer. So that's where that coding and AI building sort of is starting to help us and see benefit from.
Yeah. Now, is that one of the reasons, a couple of things you mentioned there, the pricing, also setting up, I guess, the building notes, automating a lot of the vetting of guests. Is that one of the biggest reasons that building owners, landlords choose to outsource this rather than build it themselves?
Yeah, the tech stack itself is humongous. It's very costly as well, and it's also very unique and also very different to the more conventional property management systems that they will use for the long-term tenants. So you often find you can buy the tech, but then you need to find the people to help you run the department and run that business within a business. So there are barriers to sort of doing what we do within those portfolios, but there's definitely providers out there that are sort of bridging that gap more and more.
Yep. Now you mentioned using AI for some of the more generic or more repetitive customer questions, customer sort of engagement. Where would you be cautious about using AI in the guest experience?
It will be around when things are going wrong. Imagine if a guest's heating is off. There's only so much that we want to do to sort of unload our human team to I really want them to be involved and really deliver that level of service. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're only as good as your last clean, you're only as good as your last stay, and you're only as good as your last guest review. So if you do have elements of AI sort of missing the tone or missing the urgency, that can create negativity. And at the scale that we do, that's so important. So I think it's about channeling and surfacing up the kind of most important things to our team, so then they can step in a timely basis. We run a 24/7 team that are able to step in as needed, which is really fantastic. So it's just about highlighting those things and then getting our team involved to take action on that regard. That would be one of my big things. I think another thing will be no, let's leave that off. I'll leave that one off.
Okay, no problem. Looking ahead, so
Yeah.
How do you think about the student accommodation and the build to rent operating model changing over the next few years?
I think we're already starting to see it, specifically in student accommodation. There's a lot of buildings that are already looking and reviewing change of use, so changing their planning permissions to then start accepting a non-student guest profile. Not every building will be able to do that or want to do that. We recommend for our clients, if you want to do a mixture of guests where you have that permission already in place, it's best done so when you've got different entrance ways and sort of points of ingress and egress for guests, so then you're not mingling communities. But it's one of those things where in certain markets it's essential, it's unavoidable. You absolutely need to have the option to go after a portfolio of guests. We're also seeing from the student accommodation world, there's a lot of students that are now going and renting apartments in build to rent. So there's sort of this loss of kind of students within those PBSA schemes to build to rent. And we're also seeing build to rent starting to limit how many students are staying within their communities, just so that they can balance kind of the community events to be varied and accommodating to everyone. There's definitely going to be further expansion and building across the UK and Ireland, where we operate in primary and secondary cities. We're excited to be involved in that, and I think what we're also seeing, as I hinted at before as well, is as we're becoming more sticky within these portfolios, we've had clients go after buildings and go after bids where we've done numbers as part of their bid, and it allows them to be more competitive in closing of that building. So we're seeing a change where these operators are saying, this is a really useful business model for us. It solves an issue for us, both seasonally, but also if the market takes a downturn. So that's where I also see the market evolving, which is exciting, given that obviously we're at the forefront of that and we're blended into these strategies.
Yep. And I guess on that, so specifically for Bloqq, what's your next stage of growth look like?
So we're currently exploring expansion into Europe. There's quite a lot of our clients that have buildings there already. We are headquartered in Barcelona and in London as well. We've done that from the start because we've always envisioned sort of becoming Europe-centric as well. So our expansion sort of is currently underway. We're speaking with respective clients and also meeting with new people just to sort of explore what it looks like for them and start that education process. That helps us, one, diversify where we operate, but it also then starts to protect us from legislation. Legislation is coming in place for Europe. It's sort of coming in place for the UK as well. In some areas it's already in place. So as a business, we need to make sure we're safeguarded and we're not limiting ourselves to just one territory where it's not that we would be wiped out, but like we want to be able to ensure that any de-acceleration to our potential business model is not doesn't sort of set us back as a business. So by having multi-territories, that will help us significantly. And there's an interest from our clients to be pulled into Europe already, which is really fantastic. So we already operate in Ireland, but going onto the continent is sort of our plan next, really.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get political or anything, but I think globally there's a shortage of student accommodation in a lot of key markets.
Absolutely.
So I'm surprised that regulation obviously helps protect the industry, but I'm surprised that you're seeing potentially is that it's a potential threat with the way the regulation might be coming in, because I see your platform is actually probably supporting a lot of operators and building owners by providing data platform plus security, data security and data.
Definitely. And we're seeing it as well in the sense that where in some situations, by us having short-term rentals in a building, specifically in build-to-rent and even in student accommodation, we serve as an extension to our client sales team. They'll come and stay with us for a night or two to test out the building, to see the community, and quite often we're referring back students or tenants to our clients saying, hey, this guest would like to book with us long-term, and obviously that's not what we deal with, so then we hand them back to our clients. So there is definitely a multitude of benefits.
Yep. Now, what do you want Bloqq to be known as in the market then in the future?
We're going after the biggest operator in Europe, that's for sure. We're heading strongly towards that. There's a lot of work still to be done, don't get me wrong. We're still only 2.5 years old, but you've got to aim big. You've got to aim big. And I think with the sort of portfolios and clients we work with, there's absolutely the potential for that. It's really exciting, very, very exciting.
Yep. I mean, well done on the growth in the last 2.5 years. How many sort of, I guess, a stat for some of the people that might be listening, what's a stat that you've gone from, say, 0 beds or 0 doors to where you're sitting now?
We're in the thousands of beds at the moment, which is really exciting given where we started from, which was, we started with about 50, 60 units to start with, and we've grown significantly in that time. I think one thing I'll always point out is, that sounds really exciting and very impressive, but it's a fluid portfolio. So we'll be onboarding buildings constantly and offboarding constantly. So our numbers are always changing, but that's why the focus has so much been focused on building these portfolio partnerships and having a consistent sales motion so that we can constantly be finding and sourcing new growth to sort of both increase our capacity but also and sort of mitigate that fluidity of our portfolio. But yes, it's a big number and we're very proud of it, and the future is very rosy given the pipeline we have, which is really exciting.
Well, Tom, look, it's been great, and I sort of like the way that Bloqq, you're solving a practical problem in the market. So, like you've got empty units, seasonal gaps, lease-up periods. They're not sort of new problems, but I guess you're providing ways to give owners and operators some more flexibility, and opportunity as well, because the time to value and also the opportunity for operators to fill some of those revenue gaps. And they start to operate more like a hotel. Look, for anyone listening who wants to learn more about Bloqq, where can they go and who should they reach out to?
So you can have a look at our website, But you also follow me on LinkedIn. I try to sort of share insights into what we're working on and what we're seeing in the industry. I also write a monthly newsletter called the Short Letter, where we talk a lot more about kind of what we're doing as a business and sharing. Each sort of month we look at a market and talk about the potential for short stays in the context of build to rent PBSA. I always like to share value and data because it sort of comes back from my engineering background. Definitely reach out to us there, and we're open to speak with clients around potential buildings if they're looking to explore short-term rentals or even just have a chat just to see if it's a good fit for them.
Great. Perfect. I'll put those details in the show notes, so if you want to learn more about Bloqq, you can check them out in the details that will be below. Look, Tom, thanks again for joining me on the show. I really appreciate it, and really appreciate you sharing some of the insights and also, I guess the market that you operate in, and the business that you've built over the last couple of years.
Thanks for having me on, Stuart. It's been a pleasure. It really has.
Excellent. And for everyone listening, until next time, thanks for listening.